Two important keys to composition in photography are 1, deciding what to put in the frame and what to exclude from the frame, and 2, how to arrange things in the frame to create a compelling image. And we do this by making choices about field of view, perspective, and depth of field when we're out in the field creating the image. But sometimes our compositions can be further improved by cropping in post-processing. And there's a little known tool in Lightroom that can help you with these cropping decisions, and I'm going to show you how to use it in today's video, so stay tuned. Hey there, photographers, Brenda Petrella here, and welcome to Outdoor Photography School, where we help you create better images and reconnect with nature. As I said in the intro, I'm going to show you how to use a crop tool in Lightroom that can help guide you in your cropping decisions. But first, why would you want to crop if the goal is to get the composition right in camera? Well, first of all, sometimes it's difficult to get it right in camera if you're limited by where you can position yourself in your camera, or perhaps you've composed the image with the intention of cropping it later to a different aspect ratio because you feel like that would make the composition stronger. So in that case, you're actually shooting with the intention to crop. Remember, most DSLR cameras have sensors that are of the 3:2 aspect ratio or the 4:3 aspect ratio if it's a micro four thirds camera, and we don't need to be limited by those aspect ratios in our final images. Secondly, cropping with certain design strategies in mind can sometimes improve an otherwise weak composition, so it's handy to be able to experiment with different arrangements of the elements of your composition while editing. Third, I find that cropping in different ways can sometimes help me see compositions within the scene that I may or may not have noticed when on site. And this type of cropping is more of an exercise that may be pretty dramatic and likely not what you would want to do for a final image, for printing at least, because you would lose too many pixels otherwise. But it is a great way to train your eye to see various compositions and play around with how different aspect ratios and how different arrangements can change the feeling or message of the image. So the tool in Lightroom is called the Crop Guide Overlay tool, and it basically overlays various types of compositional grids on top of your image so that you can then crop according to these different guides should you choose to use them. And there are 8 different overlays, 6 of which are possible compositional guidelines that you can use at your discretion. They've all been shown in one way or another to provide visual cues to help the viewer understand or feel what's being communicated in the image. So, for example, where you choose to place different elements of your composition can create effects like harmony and balance, or it could create tension and energy, causing the viewer's eyes to bounce around the frame more. So let's now see what this tool looks like over in Lightroom. I'm using Lightroom Classic for this example in a black rectangle rather than an actual image because I think it's easier to see the grid overlays this way. So the first thing you're going to do is go over to the Develop module. Next, go under Tools, Tool Overlay, and make sure that it's on Auto Show. Otherwise, you won't see the overlays. The next thing we're going to do is come over to the right-hand side and click on the Crop tool, or you can use the keyboard shortcut R to activate the crop tool. Now, by default, Lightroom has the rule of thirds overlay activated, and I'm willing to bet that you have heard of the rule of thirds, but in case not, it basically divides the rectangle vertically and horizontally into thirds. And it is believed by some that placing your subject on one of these lines or at the intersecting points will produce a more appealing image. Now, there's a lot of debate about this, and the rule of thirds, whether you love it or hate it, is a widely used compositional tool that many photographers employ, which is why Lightroom has included it. It's outside the scope of today's video to go into the debate over the rule of thirds or any of the other compositional guides I'm going to show you in this tool, so that may be a topic I save for a future video. Okay, now if we want to see the other overlays, we need to go back to the top menu and click on Tools, and then Crop Guide Overlay, and then down to Choose Overlays to Cycle. And here you can select which overlays you can see. So let's select all of them and click OK. Now, if we click on the letter O, we will cycle through these various overlays. And if you're ever unsure which one you are looking at, you can simply go back up to Tools, down to Crop Guide Overlay, and wherever the check mark is what overlay you're looking at. So let's start with the first one, which is the grid. This is simply a checkerboard. It's useful for when you need to level a horizon, fix some lens distortion, for example, or say you're doing architecture photography and you need to line up the buildings or other structures in the image. Now click O, and that will advance you to the next overlay, which is the rule of third, which we've already discussed. So now click again, and now we see the diagonals overlay. And personally, I rarely use this one for whatever reason, but it's based on what's called the rabattement of the rectangle. Basically what that means is that you take one of the short edges of the rectangle and use it to make a square within the rectangle, and then draw diagonals from the corners of the square to make an X inside that square. And then you repeat that rebattement with the other short side of the rectangle. And if you erase the sides of the square that you drew, then the result is a grid that looks like this. The idea is that you would place compositional elements or the subject along any of these lines, and it's supposed to create a little more movement in the image than, say, the rule of thirds. Now, if you click O again, now we see the rectangle has been divided into quadrants, and this is helpful for if you want to put your subject in the middle, or if you want to divide the scene evenly for some reason, say for symmetrical reasons, like if you were doing an image of a reflection. If you click O again, now we have what's called the triangles overlay, and this one is based on another compositional technique known as dynamic symmetry. And the lines here are basically a simplification of what's called the armature or a framework of a rectangle that's divided up according to its dynamic symmetry. So here's an example of what a dynamic symmetry grid looks like, and you can see that it contains two main diagonal lines and these reciprocal diagonals that connect the corners of the rectangle to the main diagonals at 90 degrees. And these are the lines that make up the triangles overlay. The idea with the triangles overlay, like many of these overlays, is to place your subject and supporting characters such as leading lines and tonal contrast, colors and shapes, etc., along these lines or within a triangle. Okay, pressing O again, we now see the golden ratio grid. The golden ratio grid is derived from the golden ratio, which is symbolized by the Greek letter phi or phi, and it's also called the golden mean, the golden section, the divine proportion, the golden number, and many other names. The golden ratio is an irrational number, meaning the decimals go on forever, but it's often rounded to 1.618 for ease of discussion. Two numbers are considered to be in the golden ratio if they follow this equation, where the ratio of the two numbers, a and b, is equal to the ratio of a plus b over a. A rectangle that has an aspect ratio of 1 to 1.618 is called a golden rectangle. Now, there is a ton of information out there about the golden ratio and the golden spiral, which we're going to talk about in a second, and its significance or lack thereof in composition. Again, I'm not going to go into the debate over this in today's video, but perhaps I'll work on a video on this topic for another day because it is a very interesting discussion. You can create a golden ratio grid by using the rabattement of the rectangle, as I mentioned earlier, with the diagonals overlay. If you go through that exercise of drawing it out, you'll see that each of the four corners contains a golden rectangle, as does the center. The golden ratio grid, like any of these overlays, is just another way that you can choose to position your compositional elements within the frame. If we hit O again, now we have the golden spiral, which is also based on the golden ratio of phi or 1.618. The golden spiral is an example of a logarithmic spiral that grows at a rate of the golden ratio. And some artists believe that placing compositional elements along the golden spiral and or putting the most important parts of the image at the tight end of the spiral creates a compelling and impactful image. There are others who disagree, and again, as with any of these overlays, these are just potential guides or tools that you can choose to use in your photography or not. I am not suggesting that one is better than the other, although some artists do feel very strongly about which tool is better. Anyway, should you want to crop your image and place your compositional elements according to the golden spiral, then you can use this overlay. Now, I am going to briefly go out on a limb here, since this is such a controversial subject, but one thing that I would like to point out is that If you are going to use the golden spiral as a compositional tool, then be sure to use a crop aspect ratio of 1 to 1.618, not 3 by 2 or 4 by 3 or 5 by 4 or any other aspect ratio. Otherwise, it's not a golden spiral, because the golden spiral, by definition, is dependent on the golden ratio of 1 to 1.618. So if you use a different aspect ratio, it will no longer contain the golden spiral. It will just be a spiral. Now, Lightroom makes this confusing because it allows you to use the golden spiral overlay at any aspect ratio, and it will squeeze and stretch the spiral to fit whatever frame you create. And that's okay, so long as you realize that you're not cropping to the golden spiral. Again, at any other aspect ratios, it's just a spiral. And like any strong line or curve in an image, it can be used very effectively as a leading line or as a way of bringing the viewer through the image. And I've seen some photographers use the golden spiral overlay in an attempt to either improve their image or claim that their composition follows the golden spiral technique. However, they're not using the correct aspect ratio for it to be the golden spiral, and so in a sense, it's a false claim, even if it's unintentional on their part. So, if you use this overlay, just be mindful of that and be careful about making claims about using the golden spiral if you are in fact using a different aspect ratio. If you do want to use the golden spiral, then you need to create a custom aspect ratio in Lightroom, which is actually very easy to do. Simply go over to the crop tool area, click on Original, which is next to that little padlock, and scroll down and say Enter Custom. And here you can enter your custom ratio. And you can do 1 to 1.618 and click OK. And now it's available there for you to use. Okay, enough about that. Moving on. If we click O again, we get to the last overlay, which is simply a preview for what different aspect ratios would look like should you want to crop to them. And last but not least, you can change the orientation of any of these overlays if you simply hold down Shift when you click on O, and they will change the orientation of the overlay. Okay, hopefully that was helpful and you can have some fun experimenting with the crop tool. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.